It's a huge pleasure to introduce Professor Paulo Guimarães, who I cannot call Paulo Guimarães. His name for me is Miúdo.
Yes, that's
right?
my name, yeah.
You can call him Miúdo as well. Miúdo was my master, my PhD, and my life advisor, right? He is the person that I always call upon a problem, a decision, good news, anything. He's like one of the most important people in my life. Oh. It's hard to make this, guys. Yeah, I know, me too. So his heart is not miúdo. He has a big heart. And being able to count with his support is one of the best things of my academic life. So treat him well, guys. So let's move to the formal part of the introduction. Okay. So Miúdo is a biologist by training with a bachelor from University of Campinas, where he did his master, PhD in ecology, and his postdoc at the physics department, institute, actually. Miúdo was a visiting researcher in many places, such as Estación Biológica de Doñana in Spain with Pedro Giordano, at Unesp Rio Claro with Mauro Galetti, at the University of California, Santa Cruz with John Thompson. And currently he's a full professor here in São Paulo, at the University of São Paulo, at the Department of Ecology, teaching courses such community ecology and complex networks for ecological interactions. His research concerns understanding the origin, maintenance, and fragility of large-scale patterns in ecological networks in terms of ecological and evolutionary processes that operate at different scales. In Miúdo's lab, they combine empirical data of ecological interactions, information on the natural history of interacting species, mathematical modeling, and network science. And here he will be teaching community ecology course, correct?
Yeah.
So help me to welcome Miúdo.
Thank you, Flavia. Thank you all for coming today. It's a pleasure to be here. I will not talk about the introduction. Flavia, I would just mention that I would like to be 1% of what Flavia says about me. That should be enough. Okay. And today I would like to talk about community ecology, and specifically it will be a very narrow view of community ecology this week, because I will be focusing on species interactions, on how ecological interactions shape, help us to answer one of the main questions in ecology, or maybe in biology, that is how multiple species can coexist in a single place. Before I continue, I would like to say that if you cannot hear me well, or if I'm being very confusing, or if my English is not enough for understanding, that's okay. Please just stop me anytime you guys want. No problem at all, okay? So I will focus on how different interactions shape patterns of diversity. Our main problem here, we try to understand how diversity is maintained in a single site. Next week, we will probably go on the edge of the acknowledgement in the area by exploring problems related to networks that emerge naturally when you combine ecological interactions. By now, I will focus on different interactions, and we will start to build up a picture, like a theoretical map of how diversity can be maintained. So what organizes biodiversity is our main question. And I would rather say our only question here. And this question is not new, but to get there, I would like to mention that diversity is something that is quite unique. I mean, life is unique on our planet as far as we know, But when you think on diversity, this is quite special. Earth is a special place when you talk about information, about order in nature. Some places, some points in space and time in our universe are unique in terms of energy. Like when a star goes supernova, this is a point in the time and space that you get a lot of energy showing up for just a moment. Or when you have a black hole, is a place when you have a lot of mass concentrated in a single point of space and time. But Earth is important, is unique, sorry, not important, is unique. It's important because we are here, isn't it? But it's unique in the sense that you see non-random structure, physical structures that emerge. And this comes up in many shapes, but I would like to point out that is not how the rest of the universe usually behaves. The universe is a place that goes to entropy, isn't it? Like entropy is always increasing, and this is true here, of course, as well. But when entropy increases, what you get at the end of the day is the loss of non-random structures, isn't it? Like you just have, like when you here, for example, you have the ink there, you put the ink in the water, then there is some organization that relates to how the ink get mixed with the water, but at the end of the day, entropy wins, always wins, and you have nothing, no structure. Earth we have pockets of structural order that fight against entropy. At the end of the day, entropy will win, we know that, but by now, because our systems are far from equilibrium, you see some structures. Some of them can be observed in other planets, isn't it? Like a hurricane or things like that. You can see these physical structures emerging in other points of the universe. Some of them are strictly related to us, like the art, the culture, this kind of one way of look to that, to the information here is forgetting about the meaning for one moment and focusing on the physical structure that we observe. But our planet, for billions of years, is the place of life. And life is a testimony about how to fight entropy, in the sense that you are generating non-random patterns, and these non-random patterns are replicating themselves over and over again, increasing diversity through time. I will focus here on that, and I would like to bring in this moment, two very important quotes by Ramon Margalef, a Catalan Spanish ecologist, that mentions about the role of life as an example of non-random patterns emerging in nature. So Margalef was quite an inspirational science, and at some point he said that if he would like to have, like, on the top of his head a definition for life, he would say that it's a physical system that has this amazing ability to be efficient and transform the increase of entropy. Every time you eat, you are increasing the entropy, isn't it? Like you're destroying structures. And in information that's usable, like all the biochemical pathways that you guys have running over and over in your cells, the fact that you can generate life from life and things like that. This increasing information that is almost unavoidable when we talk about life, it's the manifestation of a very important developmental, historical development. Life is trapped itself in the task of write an endless history. I forget. I ask you for excuse for my Catalan. okay, and for my English as well. So what organizes biodiversity? How this amount of information in the form of multiple species that you can observe in any site of this planet are maintained. So we focus on a narrow aspect of the problem of diversity here and now. We are not talking about evolutionary processes, for instance. We talk a bit about that during the week, but it will not be the focus. And first of all, we need to realize that diversity is by any means unavoidable, at least from a logical point of view. Although Margalef was pointing out that the increase of information seems to be unavoidable, if you think on life by itself, things could be very different, and sometimes they are. Like, it's not rare that you find a place on Earth that a single species take over everything, at least for short periods of time. So this illustrates that sometimes diversity is not unavoidable. There is situations that one single life form could take over everything. So why and how multiple species are coexisting? And this question is not new at all. Oh, sorry, this is in Portuguese. I'm sorry about that. Because the problem of the biodiversity of organization is related to almost any, if you go back to any civilization on Earth, they create some explanation about how diversity was generated and maintained. It's not something that's particular for us. My favorite one comes from Brazilian native people group called Tupis, that they say that the explanation is beautiful and very simple. Everything has a mother. And so and if you finish the word with C, like for the Brazilians, Saci is one example, but here the moon is Iaci, C is the mother, so it's the mother of the fruits are just being governed by their mother. That's the explanation. And curiously, the same word, C, is also related to things that can destroy you. So they generate you like a mother, but they can destroy you as well. And you see through the week that some of the processes that we are talking about maintain diversity, but when you change them, you actually destroy diversity. And probably the effect of humans today on diversity could be interpreted, at least on some level, as we and a group of species taking over the process, the very same process that usually maintain diversity in other conditions. So today I will make a very short review on individuals and populations, basic concepts. I know that you guys had a population biology kind of course with Roberto Krenkel about models in ecology. Then we go to diversity as uncertainty. And I will focus on some very simple properties that ecological communities share. And from these properties, we'll focus in one of them. We'll talk a bit more about that is some sort of first law for biology. That is the Malthusian growth, the density independent growth. And then from that, we will derive the four groups of processes that combined lead to diversity at a local level when we talk about ecological communities. I will define ecological communities in a moment. I will finish with a summary and some literature that you guys would be more than welcome to take a look. And if you have difficulty to find any of the PDFs, just write to me and I am more than glad to share. And at the end, I expect that we all will be able to understand what is a ecological community. That is the most simple task for today. Some basic features and processes operating in ecological communities, and one of the most fundamental laws of biology, ecology and biology in general, that is the potential for any population, no matter the time scales they operate, no matter how fast they reproduce, the potential for any population to take over everything in a glimpse of time, instantaneously. So if they are able to do that, how the heck multiple species coexist? So let's take a very short review on individuals and populations. And first of all, I'd like to define ecology. Ecology has many different definitions, but I would like to use two that, for me, describes two ways of thinking ecology in a broad sense. The first one is a very narrow and both of them I love, okay? So I will say that it's a very good definition, but I like both of them. But it's the definition by Krebs that is a very narrow definition and very operational definition, and for me characterize the way, like, for example, people in US thinks on ecology. Ecology is essentially a demography of plants, animals, and fungi. Okay? It's the study of the interactions that determine the distribution and abundance of organisms. And interaction here is interaction among them and with the environment as well. The other one is definition by the late Charles Elton, was a maverick in the study of ecology. He published one book in 1927 that becomes a classic called Animal Ecology. It's amazing. Each page is a different idea. And there he just started the book like that. So ecology is simple, scientific, natural history. And this is the way, like, we Brazilians, and I see people in that, I'll talk places I went, so I'll not talk about general, like, I'll not say about Europe, but in Spain, people think on ecology more like that. We Brazilians always think more about like that, Mexico as well. And these two definitions I see as complementary because we are always using natural history to understand these patterns of distribution and abundance of organisms. By now, we are not focused on the evolutionary processes that in deep time generated the patterns we will observe, okay? We are just focusing on the current patterns right now. And here is a review of individuals and populations. This is everything you need to know about individuals and populations for understanding community ecology, okay? So population is a bunch of individuals of the same species in the same site. They reproduce, they generate cute versions of themselves. Community is the set of species, individuals of different species that coexist in space and time. Ecosystem, you include also abiotic factors and processes that interact with the community, ecological community. Okay? Any question? So next, I will focus on this week on this aspect here, the community. In community, is the ecological community is an ensemble of species, of populations of different species that occur together in space and time. So, having that set up, we'll go to the study of diversity. And first I would like to define diversity, and then I get the dictionary to get a definition of it. And it's a range of many people or things that are very different from each other. I think that this is very important because those words mean, they have particular meaning, and sometimes we need to have this very clear to actually get inside the operational definitions that we go over in a moment. But all these ideas, I joke with my students, they start not in the brain, or in the heart or in the stomach. You know, like it's just, you're feeling something that you want to characterize. And you want to characterize this difference, disparity, diversity. And that's why these definitions are so general at the beginning, because they tend to characterize here a very small subsample of human diversity. And when you have that, you need to get some ways of describe this variation. And a way of describe this variation is to compare that, is to find patterns. You need to find patterns. And to find patterns, and that is the irony of everything here, is that to have patterns, you need to simplify, aggregate. So you have diversity, but you need to find ways of capture this diversity in simple descriptors. And of course, this idea is not new, but like in this book that has like 23 centuries ago, was wrote 23 centuries ago, Aristotle is telling us that there is no possibility of doing science on individual cases. Any form of art or individual cases. Because each individual case is, of course, defined by idiosyncratic aspects. They are variable. So we need to aggregate. You need to find ways of group things in a meaningful way. And like when you think about humans, you can measure the diversity in some sense as a departure for some average. We can generate an average that describes some properties. Like when you go to, like I'm 43, so I'm starting to be worried about that. You go to a physician, you need to do the blood exams, and then there is a range, isn't it? This range is actually the non-artistic version of it. It's a range that average person, sometimes with my own age or in my gender or my ethnicity, that has this particular, should have this particular value. If I'm out of that, maybe it's nothing. For medicine, usually is a problem. Isn't it? Like the departure, and you measure that. So you're capturing the range there is the diversity. That is the diversity that is healthy diversity. If we're out of that, then let's take a second look. Maybe something idiosyncratic of your family has no problem at all, but maybe it's not. Maybe something that you need to take care of. And this is a very efficient approach. Like we double our life expectancy thanks to this kind of approach. So this is quite a efficient way of proceed. But to do so, we need to define what is a pattern. So we need to define what means pattern. Like it's like how you measure things, you characterize things, and pattern has to do with irregularity, with particular arrangements that you observe in nature. In our case, in ecological communities. One very important thing about diversity and pattern is that we can only detect pattern when there is diversity. Like in a white wall, there is no structure. It's just a wall there. Any piece of that is quite identical to any other piece of that. There is nothing special. But if you have variation in form, color, size, weight, motion, then you can start to view things, you start to view arrangements, you start to detect equilibrium and in other things that we are interested in when you talk about art, but also when you talk about scientific patterns. So let's go to ecology. In ecology, we need to characterize diversity in some ways. And so we have diversity, that we have variation, we need to measure this variation, and at the same time simplify and aggregate to actually can handle that. Because, like for me, I could take hours talking about these 4 species. I'm no field biologist or even an ornithologist. I like to bird watching, but I'm not an ornithologist. But this is my favorite group of animals. Those are falcons. Falcons and caracaras, the family is Falconidae. And each species here is a type of falcon that you can observe in this state. So we have the Peregrine Falcon, the most the fastest animal on Earth, that prey upon bombing over animals like other birds and killing them in flying open areas, just drop like a bomb and hit the animal there. We have the forest falcon, also a vertebrate specialist, prey upon multiple vertebrate species in rainforests. But these animals fly within the forest, so it's very good in maneuvers through the trees, very efficient. This one is a specialist in prey upon snakes and sometimes lizards. Almost the entire diet is snakes in some places. And this is caracara. You can see some of them flying around here. It's an incredible generalist animal that can feed on many different resources, from fruits to eggs, from scavenging dead animals to prey upon vertebrates. So we need to capture this diversity. And to do that, I will take over all these things that I really like on these animals, and I will call this 4. So this is the first and most basic description of diversity. We call that species richness. Species richness is simply the number of species that you observe in a given point of space and time. You can like circumvent that to a particular group. Like here, we have a map of the bird diversity across the globe. The hotter the color, the higher the number of species, and this is the most simple description of biodiversity, okay? Very simple descriptor. But then, okay, so this is 4. I can change the slides, and this is also 4. And even if you are not a biologist, you can realize that these 4 guys here are quite more similar to each other than these other 4 species, isn't it? And that's true. Like this, we keep a raptor over there, but then we have something that looks like, this is called uru in Portuguese, is a bird distantly related to pheasants and the fowl and things like that. We have a water bird here and a frugivorous bird there. Those are quite different, but still 4. Of course, richness will capture just one aspect of diversity. Any measure will capture just one aspect of diversity. And which aspect of diversity we should capture? The one that you are interested on. The one that you have questions to answer. It's as simple as that. You use an index based on your questions and your hypotheses, not because some of them has more information or is more detailed. I don't want details. I want details enough to answer my questions and test my hypotheses. Okay? If you want the nature in the entire details, go to a forest. It's there. It is fantastic, isn't it? You don't need to have like everything in a single index. But this calls us attention that one particular aspect of diversity that you may be considered on is species composition. It's the list of species in a given place. So not only the number, but who are these species that are used in that particular site. I would like to ask a question to you guys. So I have here, imagine that these symbols here represent, these diamonds represent individuals. The colors are different species, okay? Which one of them is more diverse? I don't want you guys to use the index that I told you before. Just from the top of your stomach, which of those are more diverse? The first one, isn't it? For me, it's the same. They have the same number of species, though. So for species richness is blind to the feeling that you guys had when you look to that. There is something missing that our intuition tells us that could be important. And what is missing here is the equitativity in the distribution of abundances. It's the frequency, the relative frequency. If diversity is distinctness, so in a diverse system, there is no dominant element. And this is actually the jargon, the technical term to the species that is more frequent than any other species in the community. We call them the dominant species. Okay? It's just because it's more frequent. So diversity should, in some sense, capture this notion that the densities should be more equitative. So more equal. If everything occurs at the same frequency, then it's more diverse than have one element dominating the system. So there is a bunch of diverse indexes that combine richness, what we call species abundant distribution, the SADs. And those will be our response variables through this week. We will focus sometimes in species richness, sometimes in species composition, sometimes in diversity index. I would like to tell you guys that right from the beginning that we will not do much math during this week. I love math, but it will be much more a conceptual first week. Then the second week, you can you can push the math. So I would like to spend some minutes more here telling you how the reasoning underlines some of these measures. And this will relate to the notion that we call information. Please.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't get actually what is a species composition. It's like the number, like the species that are in the environment, or it's like a more abundance thing?
No, it's the list of species in a given place. Okay.
Thank you. And
you can sometimes incorporate abundances in description, but the point is that you are not get rid from the Latin binomials. You are using the names of the species. Like you are considering in some ways who is there, not only how many is there.
And when you're talking about the sets, the abundance distribution, we are talking about like some math equation that will give us like a term that tell us like how equity, like how many individuals, how many species.
When you talk about the species abundant distributions, we are talking about the distribution of abundances in a given community. There is ways of doing theory for that. So there is theoretical models that predict particular species abundance distributions. And there is ways of capture and combine this information with richness to generate an index of diversity that captures this notion. And I will use two examples to illustrate that here. So, and to do so, I would like to emphasize the notion that diversity implies or is related to uncertainty. For example, if you are in a sequoia forest, I blind you and you are just walking and your head hit one tree. I hope you don't die with that, but if you don't die, which is the tree that you hit your head in a sequoia forest? It's a sequoia, isn't it? Because there is only sequoias in a sequoia forest. Oh, sorry, or almost only sequoias in a sequoia forest. Okay? So you have no uncertainty. You are 100% sure about the identity of the species. In the Atlantic forest, with 1,000 different tree species in a single site, every time you hit your head in a different tree, in a different individual tree, will be a different species. It's not a good way of sampling trees in Atlantic forest, hit your head on that, but the thing that you are always you're unsure, about the identity of the tree. And this is diversity in this sense. Is how much information you need to actually unequivocally identify a given individual. This is one of the indexes that we will talk today, and this will link directly with information theory. But by now, I think I would start first No, I will start with that. That's Gini Simpson index is easier. But I will start with one index that in ecology we call Shannon diversity, but this actually was not created by ecologists. It was created by Shannon, one of the fathers of information theory. One of those guys that because of him, we have these wonderful machines, isn't it? Like doing what they do. And the trick here is very simple. I would like to illustrate. It's like a game, actually. Let's see if I can do that. There's just 2 buttons, so I hope I don't get wrong. And could you help me out? Yes. Okay. So I will list here some number. You choose one of them numbers, but you cannot tell me. Okay. You can share with your colleagues. I promise I will not hurt. You can show your hands. Okay? Okay? So the thing that I now need to get which number it is. Of course, I'm no magician. So what I do some questions, some very simple questions that will partition this set out, and then I can identify this number. So my first question is equal or smaller than 4? Okay, equal and smaller. Okay, so I know that is not here, isn't it? I can do the same here again and say is equal or smaller than 2? No? Okay, so the next question, unequivocally with the next question, no matter if I'm right or wrong, I know the number, isn't it? After that question. So if I ask 3, okay, I get right, I always wrong. But even if I was wrong, I only need 3 questions to unequivocally find the number, isn't it? Okay, so I have here 8, isn't it? 8 possible symbols. And I need to I ask 3 questions. 3 questions that have 2 possible answers, yes or no, isn't it? Okay, isn't it? That's it. Okay, I can generalize this. This idea will help us to understand the notion of diversity and Shannon diversity index. So here, I would change that in some ways because I would like, so this will be log base 2 of 8 equals 3. Is that right? Yeah, that's correct? Yeah, okay. So I can now play with that a bit. I will now, instead of using 8, I will define this for any set of numbers. So for any set of some numbers, this will be the number of questions I need to ask. Yes, no questions I need to ask to unequivocally identify the number without any previous information. I don't know I don't know if you like prime numbers, for example. I don't. So, like in this set of numbers, I will probably choose 6 because it's divisible by 2, by 3. It's a pair, it's even. So that's way. But I don't know nothing about your number preferences, isn't it? How is your name? Camila, I don't know even your name. Sorry about that. So now I will do a trick. I will do a trick here. I will do a very simple trick that is, I will rewrite that in a different way that will be useful because here I was assuming that because I don't know nothing about you, Camila, that all numbers are equally likely to be selected. But maybe they are not. And I would like to incorporate that. I would like to incorporate this probability in some ways. The possibility of incorporating this probability, I have to say. So to do so, I will change that. I will just rewrite that like that. This equals to that. If you want to test that later, you can play that with logs in using the basis 10 because it's easier to do. And you can see how you move from 100 to 0.01 by playing with the minus sign, okay? Okay, so that's okay? So I will call this P. P. But now if I have a probability, why I should be constrained to all probabilities to be the same for all symbols? Like, I would like to explore a situation that someone has some oddity preference for 6, like me. So I can create a change here, and I can define a probability that will be for each symbol I. Each number here now can have a different probability if I like. Okay? I will call that, or Shannon will call that, the uncertainty to get I. Okay? So if I have just one number, so P is equals 1. Log a number to give 1 here, 2 power to each number gives 1. It's 0, isn't it? You have no uncertainty. If everything is sequoias, you have no uncertainty. So now I can go give one step beyond, and I can compute the average uncertainty I have in a given site. So I can use a definition of averages. Very simple. I know that you guys are doing a course on quantitative biology, isn't it? Like, so this sounds silly, but it's my math level. Sorry for that. So I need to define an average, and there is 2 ways to define an average, isn't it? Like if I get the high of you guys, I will just measure everybody and divide by the number of individuals. Or I can ask, how many of you guys have 1 meter and 64? And then I count the frequency, isn't it? Is that correct? So I use the second definition. So I will define the average uncertainty as a sum that I go over all the symbols. So we have n equals 8 will be 8 here, isn't it? Of the frequency of that symbol in my sample, in my community, times the uncertainty associated to each symbol. I'm computing the average uncertainty. I can substitute here that. I can take the minus sign out of the summatory. It's just times minus 1, isn't it? Like, I just can do that. And this is the Shannon index, the Shannon entropy. And this is the main measure of diversity using ecology. And is essentially measuring the average uncertainty that you have in an ecological community. This comes from information theory. This is the amount of information that you need to have. Yeah, the amount of information that you need to have to unequivocally identify a given string, a given sequence, isn't it? So he is just measuring uncertainty. So that introduction that I was relating life with information was not so kind of metaphor. No, it's the way we capture that stomach feeling that you guys had when you looked at that symbol and say, okay, that particular image is more diverse because there is the frequencies are not, there is no dominant species there. And you capture that using Shannon Diversity Index. Okay? Later, if you guys want, I can share with you the derivation of the index. And it is very interesting work, isn't it? Like Shannon wrote a book that has almost all the information there about the theory of information, ask the main questions, answer a bunch of them, and close the book. It's really amazing work. So let's go to the other index that is even more simpler, but is also related to the notion of uncertainty. This second index is called Gini-Simpson index, and I'm not a big fan of indexes, okay, or methods. I'm not this kind of guy, but I'm just using them as a tool to emphasize the notion that in ecology we quantify patterns of diversity in terms of uncertainty. So the Gini-Simpson index is very simple. It's actually, there's different versions of it, but I always get confused which one is, but it's essentially like that. So P again is the frequency of some symbol, in our case some species in the community, and you make P square. And do you know why you do Pi square? Because the way we are capturing diversity here is how likely is to get two individuals of the same species in a sample. And of course we are talking about a very big, infinite sample, so you sample you take over one individual, you still having like infinite individuals in the sample, so you don't need to discount, you can make Pi square. You don't need to take like Pi and then multiply for Pi minus 1. You don't need, divided by the number of individuals. You don't need to do so. So this is a very simple index, isn't it? Like we're just measuring for all species how common are, how likely, how unsure you have to, if you get one individual from one species, to get another individual for that species. And imagine that you have a population that is equitatively distributed. All individuals occur in the same number. Okay? So the frequency of all individuals are the same. The frequency of all species are the same. And so this is 1 divided by the number of species. Okay? And so if I'm doing this sum, this will be n multiplying, isn't it? And this you lead to 1 divided to n. So this you can plug here, and you can take the maximum diversity that this system can have. Okay? Is that right? Yeah, it's right. I always get lost in this. So we have ways to characterize pattern. Now we need to understand the processes that generate those patterns. And this is what community ecology is about, and this is what Simon Levins mentioned is science is about, isn't it? Like it's to understand patterns in terms of their processes. To do so, we need to have first understanding the properties of ecological communities, those very basic properties. So the first one is if you look to a community, to ecological community, yeah?
Sorry, could you repeat again, why do we consider the square of Pi?
Why the square?
Yes.
Because imagine that you ask the way we are characterizing diversity here is, I will sample 2 individuals. How is the probability to have the 2 individuals from the same species? In the case of species I, this will be Pi times Pi. Approximately, isn't it? Because if you remove one individual, you are sampling with replacement. Okay? So we have this, yes?
I guess going back to the definition of community, I guess when I look at this definition or something like that, it comes to my mind that there is a problem of kind of units, in the sense that, for instance, I would assume that it's very common for you to have a lot of ants. It's just a lot, just by sheer number of individuals, you have a lot of ants in a particular place, and then you have a much smaller number of, say, elephants, right? So how do you protect your measure of diversity against a situation like that, right? Because that I don't think is necessarily something that is making your place less diverse, right?
That's very cool. If you can write me later, I can send you a PDF that some people try to estimate the biomass of different groups. It is amazing. I mean, it's really amazing how is uneven distributed it is in terms of the entire Earth. But I will answer as I will always answer any question about the indexes. It always depends on your question. If you are asking questions that involve different trophic levels, different groups of species, and you need to capture this diversity in some ways, you need to take care about that. Usually, though, when you use those indexes, you are not looking to the entire community. You are looking to the assemblage of a particular group of species. This will be a taxonomic group of species, or sometimes an ecological group, what we call guilds, like a group of organisms that use a resource in a similar way. So this is this usually circumvent this problem. If you need to have many different organisms in a single measure, I would say that biomass would be a much better descriptor than individuals, everything else being equal. Because the biomass, you capture the problem of numerical dominance. But sometimes you are just interested in the numerical dominance. For example, why ants are so dominant group of insects on forests? This is a good question. There's something about ants that make them special in terms of numbers. So here we have an ecological community, oasis, and as everything in nature, you can partition the patterns that we observe, in that particular case, the distribution of individuals across space, in a result, an outcome of extrinsic and intrinsic processes. It is occurring in everything on Earth, isn't it? Like when you hear music, like a symphony playing, this is an example of structure being imposed by two detectors. There's two detectors that are imposing here the structure of the system. Who are them? One of them, the maestro, isn't it? Like he's controlling everything, controlling the intensity you are playing, paying attention if someone is not following correctly the rest of the musicians, isn't it? And the other one is the sheet, isn't it? Like it's telling you what to play. You need to play that. This is not a jam session. The musician has no independence here whatsoever. The structure is generated by an extrinsic factor, the maestro and the sheets. Everybody always looking to the maestro or to their sheets. Like here, the structure is imposed by the environment, essentially by the distribution of water. Too much water, too few water, and you have no big plants there. We focus in this course, though, in patterns that are generated by, there is a Peregrine Falcon attacking, but these birds are flying around like a unique mass of, like an organism, isn't it? And there is no leader here. Those are starlings. There is no leader here. And there is no way those birds know the movement of the other birds. Birds are too dumb to do so. Okay? So they are moving by following laws related to interaction among the individuals. Essentially two laws here, two rules. The first one is I'm getting close to you, but not so close. I will keep some distance, but not too much as well. And the second, if you move in that direction, I move as well. I will follow your leads. But just the vicinity, I'm not looking to all birds in the system. In community ecology, when you're talking about intrinsic processes that shape ecological communities, we are talking about interactions among individuals of different species. And here, I would like to say that very loud. When I say interaction among species, this is just a short name for interaction among individuals of different species. There is no such thing in nature that we call species. I hope there is no taxonomist here. Those species are metaphor, are boxes that you lump together individuals. What we have in nature is this cheetah trying to take this wildebeest. Those guys, this could be Mary and this could be John, okay? But we lump them in a single Latin name because this allows us to generate understanding. Those boxes, the aim of those boxes is increase understanding. They are not prisons. So sometimes we just take over that. You like lump individuals in a different way. There is no problem with that. In population biology, probably is not a good idea to lump individuals from different species. But like in ecosystem ecology, people do that all the time. And they make theory and make predictions and can measure things, and that's okay. Again, we describe the nature the way is useful to answer your questions. So in these cases, patterns emerge from the interactions among the elements of the system. This is what we call emerging patterns that characterize self-organizing systems. Oops. I don't know what I did. I hope it's not a problem. Okay. So now the fact that processes are intrinsic or extrinsic is a general thing for everything on nature. So now let's take a look to some idiosyncrasies of ecological communities. The first of one, ecological communities are open. They have no boundaries. This guy, Gleason, this test, he just drove through the US, was recording the rise and fall of different species here, different curves labeled with different numbers, and you can see no clear boundaries. Some species are particularly abundant at some places, others are not so abundant as well, and they go back and forth. There is it's not like, I don't know, this glass here, isn't it? We have clear boundaries, or like us in some level. Even when you're thinking on a community that looks like closed community, like a lake is not closed community for many ecological processes. For example, the flow of nitrogen from lakes to forests is huge in temperate forests and is driven by like predators, like the bears that feed upon fish on the lake and then go to the bathroom on the forest. And this leads a huge amount of nitrogen just moving from one side to the other. They are connected. What humans do in many situations is to couple different ecological communities by like when you have fish in your home, you are actually prey upon a marine ecosystem and push this to your table here. And we are this hyper-connected node elements in a food web that can take from different places, not only food actually. We do that I don't know, like here, how many countries this come? The pieces that are here in this mobile or my t-shirt. Isn't it like we're connecting different sites all the time? So ecological communities are not close. Ecological communities are small though, are very small. And I would like to illustrate with one of them. This is the Amazon forest. It's a very small system. It's smaller than the problem that you do usually in chemistry. My wife is a molecular biologist, and their systems that fits in our LMI are much bigger than the ecological communities I would like to understand. In which sense? In every LMI in the lab of my wife, they have 1 mole of something. Yeah? You guys remember what is a mole? Let's forget it's 6.02 because it's irrelevant, isn't it? It's like 10 power to 23, isn't it? This everything, every substance in her lab has these numbers. In ecological systems, the numbers are much smaller. I'll give an extreme example. How many insects are in the world? I don't want to know species. I would like to have an estimate of individuals. How many individual insects there are in the planet? Now. It would be difficult to sample, né? But there is 2 guys that actually come up with some crazy estimates of that. Is larger or smaller than 1 mole? Of course it's smaller. You're not asking for a difference, isn't it? It's much smaller, much smaller. Much smaller. And maybe even these guys get wrong for 3 orders of magnitude. It's still much smaller. Isn't it? 10 power to 21 is much smaller than 10 power to 23, to be clear. Much, much smaller. Okay, this has a huge implication. In ecological systems, bad luck is part of the game. You are trapped in a world in that stochastic events, statistics play a role. My wife doesn't care about statistics. She do an experiment. If there is a reaction, there is a probability of a reaction, there is a reaction. There is like this black list in the gel that she gets. 100% sure. In ecological systems, there's not how to work like that. Bad luck plays a huge role because we are talking about small numbers. Numbers are smaller enough to probability not translate to relative frequency. That's the big problem, isn't it? Like you have uncertainty associated. And finally, ecological communities show a lot of non-linearity. Non-linearity is a cool word for everything that do not behave as a line. And I would like to illustrate say, okay, it's non-linear. Oh, this is non-linear. What the hell are you talking about? So I will illustrate the importance of non-linearity using an example that we start actually with a linear differential equation, but the solution of a differential equation is a non-linear equation, isn't it? And then you get the main consequence of non-linearity. Non-linearity is that you get unexpected results. Our brain that was developed to take fruits in Africa on a forest was not created to handle non-linearity. We think always in linearity. Okay, I got 10 fruits, I found other 2, now I have 12. And that's how you think all the time. So let's start from the beginning. I have 2 rats, a female and a male. What they do? They do what mammals do, isn't it? Like they reproduce. They reproduce. And they reproduce pretty fast. But even if I have 2 elephants that are not particularly fast in population growth, they increase very fast. And to describe that, we need to describe the world in terms of rates, to understand the implication and to derive what I'm calling here the first law of biology. I don't name anything, okay? I get that in a moment. But then we need to move and describe things in terms of rates. And this is very, very, for people that have a quantitative background, this is just part of the way you guys and you girls think, isn't it? But for biologists, we are not like that. I always get puzzled. What the hell people are describing differential equations when I would like to describe a system? It's not natural for us. We are not trained like that. Sometimes, once I asked to a physicist who was my former supervisor why he was writing the differential equation, he was not able to understand my question. He was like a blue screen, isn't it? He was a very kind, he is a very kind person, one of the kindest persons I ever met. So he tried to help me out, but he obviously was not understanding what I was asking. But for us biologists, this is not trivial. And there is reasons for that. The first one is that when you describe rates, you don't care about the past. You just start here and you describe things, how they move. And this is very helpful. The second one is a fact that rates are much simpler than the movements they are describing. An integral is always more complicated than its derivative, isn't it? At some point, actually, you can derivate any kind of function, or most kinds of functions, but some derivatives you cannot compute directly the integral, isn't it? This is to say how difficult it is to describe what you are actually interested in. Because as ecologist, I would like to describe how the multiple species vary in time. I don't want to describe the rate they change. But to do so is easier to describe the rate. And that's why we describe rates. And now we start from the beginning. Okay, so you guys already had the course with Roberto. You know everything here. I will go very, very fast here. But I would like to point out that in this part is where biology plays a role. If you know the basic rules of the game, as a biologist, you'd be able to do it because this is actually your biological hypothesis about how the system change, only described in mathematical terms. And mathematical terms are very useful because you can get unexpected results. Is unequivocal because once you declare the assumptions are there, and you can get things that you are not expecting. With words, it's much harder to get things, predict things that are unexpected when you use just a verbal theory. And also, words may have different meanings in different languages, and this creates confusion, or even the same language. As a Portuguese-speaking person, I'm particularly proud of the word saudade. It is really hard to translate every time, or I just get picky about that. So here is how the abundance of a species I vary in time. And for people in biology that got in that course, and although are not particularly motivated to math, Charles Darwin was a very humble person. He has this fantastic sentence. I have deeply regretted that I did not proceed far enough, at least to understand something of the great leading principles of math. And he finished that sentence saying, because people that did that, they have an extra sense. They can get things that you cannot get without these tools, without these senses. Especially, I would argue, the nonlinear consequences of the processes that we are interested on. For example, here, I would like to generate a biological description on how population grows. The simple one, now you are describing the results, but I don't want the result. I want, if you are a biologist or a scientist interested on biological systems, you put the rats together, they produce rats, isn't it? We know that the males are useless in the sense of determining the population of the size of a population, because what limits the size of a population in mammals is the number of females. This is well known. So maybe I could describe the dynamics in terms of the average number of offspring a female generates per time instant. Is it per time step, or okay? And then I can subtract how many individuals, the likelihood you die during this instant of time, this point of time, okay? So that's what we are doing here. This is the intrinsic growth rates, isn't it? Like it's just the balance of the per capita birth rate and death rate. Okay, you have migration, that's a complicated process, but let's keep this out. And then we can solve that. And the solution has this form. If someone wants that, I can send the derivation. I never remember. And it's a very odd solution, isn't it? It's unexpected in the sense that you have a number that you cannot write. So you come up with a lie like this ladder, and you have this exponent. Isn't it? Like, it's a way of describing something that you cannot write. You cannot write the Euler's number, isn't it? This is a very particular way of growth. When we say explosive growth, we are not actually describing the phenomenon. This is amazing. The way this growth is truly, truly out of chart for any kind of population. And I would like to illustrate that. I would like to make a question to you guys. I have here E. coli, very small organism, okay? E. coli. In perfect conditions, it doubles the number of E. coli every 20 minutes, okay? So my question is, oh God, I gave the answer. Sorry about that. My question was, sorry, I'm terrible. How many, let's pretend I didn't do that. How much time you need to generate a mass of E. coli that has the same mass of Earth? And the answer is less than 48 hours. It's pretty fast, isn't it? So because I'm pointing that out because you say exponential growth. And everybody think that they understand what this means, but actually there is nothing in our daily basis experience that prepare us to what exponential growth means. What exponential growth means is that in a glimpse of time, you move from the smallest tiny thing on Earth to the entire Earth without boundaries. This is density independent growth. Resources are infinite. And so this is true for every population of every animal, plant, or fungi in this planet. All of them has the potential that without control to take over everything. So what the heck, they don't. And this is called in the first law of biology, of course in analogy with the Newton's first law, because it's what happens with a population if nothing happens with a population. And of course, was not, we have this idea, I would argue that what happens when nothing happens is one of the most important scientific inventions. The first law that is fundamental in physics is based on this principle. Imagine the world without the forces acting that world. In genetics, we have something similar. We have the Hardy-Weinberg law that describes what happens when with the gene frequencies in a population from one generation to other in the absence of selection, in the absence of genetic drift, in the absence of mutation, in the absence of migration. So what happens with the gene frequencies when nothing happens with the gene frequencies? And here, Ginsburg he is a great population biologist. He's sitting Hudson. Tomorrow we'll talk more about Hutchinson. But Hudson was a very important ecologist that has this amazing sentence. Populations preserve exponential growth unless they do not. This is amazing, isn't it? Because this sounds like tautological, but the meaning is the same of Newton's first law. What happens when nothing happens with the environment? When nothing is limiting the resources of that populations. There is no enemy. There is no partner. We are just growing because you are using resources. So this is an illustration of non-linearity. Again, I would like to emphasize, of course, the differential equation that describes population growth, Malthusian population growth, as we call, is a linear equation, but the solution is not. Okay? And it's really difficult to think, generate results that are not expected, and will give you the first step that will lead us tomorrow to the notion of why competition should be one driving force shaping diversity. So let's see now a bit about the fundamental processes shaping ecological communities. And we use the fact that communities are small, open, and they have this potential of every population take over to everything to derive these four processes that shape diversity locally. Just a historical background, in 1994, we have 120 different hypotheses of how diversity is maintained. Well, a huge mess, okay? And then there is this review by Valland in 2001? I don't remember. That he argues that actually we have just four processes. The idea, it was amazing because he looked to another area in biology that care about diversity. The name of this other field is population genetics. In population genetics leads exactly with the same problem. Is the diversity of something, in this case within a species. Here we are talking about diversity across the species. We seldom look to diversity within species in community ecology. We can do, but we never do. So it's the same problem. And you look to population genetics, it's like a perfect theoretical map. They have a way of thinking. They have the statistical tests that they use are derived from the hypothesis. What Valland argues is that there is not particularly different in these two areas, two fields, scientific fields. The difference was a historical difference. Population genetics was created by a bunch, like 4 different guys, that start to do some math. Community ecology is a problem that shows up in the history of humanity many times. So if you have a background in pharmacy and you start to study the plants to generate medicines, then you start to focus on plants, and then you create what many Europeans did, was like the community ecology, plant community ecology, that comes from medicine at some level. Or if you are working with agroecological systems, you manage that in a different way. Or you are working with the pests of these systems, will be a completely different way. And so we have these many theories emerging historically in different groups of people that handle different problems. Public health, parasites. Let's do a different way, approach that in a different way. But the problem of diversity could be simplified in all these different hypotheses could be understood as a combination of 4 fundamental processes. And let's derive all of them. So everything will be always conditional to the processes are operating extrinsically or intrinsically. But let's start with ecological communities are open. Okay? The fact that ecological communities are open implies that dispersal is a major force increasing diversity. At the beginning, at least. Okay? So species are arriving and species are leaving. In general, dispersal will bring new species in the same way that gene flow will bring new genes to a population. So dispersal is our first fundamental process. The fact that communities are open and that there is non-linearities. In particularly, there is situations in which the population branch in different species, creates speciation as a way of generate diversity. This is by far the process less explored in the literature, in the ecological literature, as an important driving force. But we now know that explosive diversification generates much of the diversity we observe today, and this was driven by ecological processes, ecological opportunities, as we say, and this may feedback and increase the diversity locally. I will just mention this briefly through this week, but tomorrow I'll talk a little bit briefly about that. But I don't know, I want to do biology since I was a child, and I crazy about that particular group. So when I realized that killer whales are branching different species in front of our eyes today, this is amazing. I mean, the child inside of me just jumps and says, oh my God, I need to see all of them. Now they are different species. They are not different species. They don't care, isn't it? You can call them species or not. What they are doing is they are currently branching in different groups. Sometimes in some places, like in Canada, we have two different populations that are living together, feeding on different resources. One feeds on sea mammals, the other one on fish, on salmonid fish, on salmon. And they don't interchange genes for at least 10,000 years. They are just becoming different things, different species right now. This is amazing. So speciation play the role of mutation in population genetics. It's just generating new forms. The fact that ecological communities are small, in the sense that we have demographic stochasticity, as populations can go back and forth just by chance, and sometimes some species will die out just by chance. This creates our third process, ecological drift, analogous to genetic drift. Okay, it's just the random fluctuation because you are sampling small numbers and the populations can go back and forth. And sometimes when they hit the zero, the species die out, at least locally. And finally, because individuals interact in a nonlinear way, and just to start, because of the density-independent growth, resources will be always limiting. If populations can grow exponentially, and now we have a glimpse of what exponentially means, then there is no such a thing as sustainable growth. You can have sustainability. Sustainability is something, but the way populations, natural populations grow, everything will become a limiting resource given enough time. And the time is not too big, not too long, okay? So, just a moment. So as a consequence, individuals of the same species and of different species will fight for resources or sometimes run to not become a resource. And this will set up the basic scenario in which ecological interactions will shape diversity. If all populations can grow to the infinity and beyond, if you put them together and they use the same resources, they will compete. So that's why in ecology, competition is so important. It's not some fixation about fight or the nature in claws and thieves. It's not only that. There's some of that, of course, but it's not only that. Okay? It's because it's an unavoidable consequence of the exponential growth, the potential for exponential growth. If the populations have this ability, then at some point they will compete. So how they can coexist? This is tomorrow's lecture. Here the process, the final process is what we call selection. There is selection imposed by environment, there is selection imposed by the interactions. I will focus on the ecological interactions just because it's more interesting. Okay? But here I would like to point out, and this is much more important for the non-biologists people in the room, selection is not equal to evolution. Selection is reproduction, is differences in reproduction or in survival across individuals in a given population associated with some phenotypic, some traits, some phenotypic traits, some characteristic. This does not imply in evolution. Evolution occurs by natural selection when this trait has a genetic basis. But here in ecology, the way we approach to the problem is to assume that the variation within species can be ignored. And if this is true, we are not talking about evolution. Okay? Evolution was, the assumption can be, you can think on that in a different way. You can think in the way that evolution was very important, but is very low. And so we will not play a role here in the way these species are interacting right now to determine the diversity locally, because it's a slow process. We know this is not true. Like killer whales are speciating. But it's a useful assumption, just to start, okay? The edge of the ecological theory right now is to incorporate these evolutionary processes. But classical ecology assumes that evolution is irrelevant as a process shaping diversity currently because the time scale is so big. And the process is very slow. And we are looking just to this narrow aspect of that. To finish, so we talk about diversity, we learn how to describe patterns, we look to some features of ecological communities, and this led to 4 different processes that will shape the coexistence of species in a given site. And that's something that we will take a look through this week. I will specifically focus on selection, but tomorrow we will talk a lot about dispersal and drift as well, and just a mention to speciation when we talk about competition. So the 4 processes will play a role. Any questions? Oh, I forget. I have 5 different suggestions for readings. As you guys probably realized, I have a very biased way of approach the problem in ecology, and this is a text published in Nautilus. It's a very cool online journal, arguing that physics is not a discipline, it's a way of thinking. As a completely opposed of that, pointing out the problems with this approach is this one of the last books of Ernest Mayr on what makes biology unique, and this association with physics is completely useless for Mayr because biology is a different animal. I totally disagree with Mayr, okay? But I think this is very important. And this is Mayr, this is the guy that created the biological concept of species. So take a look. Then there is the paper by Valentin, it's 2010, about the 4 processes shaping diversity. It's a review. There is this very cool paper by Weaver, another person very important for information theory, that argues that biology, because combine a system with, the reason is like that. We understand the mechanics of simple bodies. With one body movement, like a pendulum, we understand everything. With infinite bodies, with weak interactions, we have statistical mechanics. But the problem will be biology. This is in 1950s, and biology has this number of elements that is not so big as a gas in a room, and the interactions are strong, and because the interaction is strong, they are nonlinear, and because the nonlinearity cannot be ignored, and because of that, the results are more difficult to predict, and the theory is more difficult to actually be developed. And he suggested that computers will be a tool to actually explore that. It's a very interesting work. And finally, the paper by Simon Levin, The Problem of Pattern and Scale in Ecology, is a very organized way to look to description and patterns, infer processes. If for anyone that wants to write a paper, the abstract and the first part of the introduction is a lecture, is a master class on how to write a paper. It's amazing. I mean, it's truly amazing. My supervisor, my PhD supervisor, we studied this paper for 4 months, line by line, just to learn how to write, actually. So, any question? Yeah?
When you were presenting the 4 different features or factors, I do not recall what you referred to them to. One of those was ecological drift, and you mentioned just like genetic drift, something like that. Can you further distinguish what the 2 things are?
Of course, they from the statistical point of view, they are the same thing. They are the stochastic variation in the relative frequency of something through time because you are sampling a small population. But in genetic drift, you are sampling genes through the reproductive event. In the ecological drift, you are sampling species through the same process. So the demography will show some stochastic variation because the populations are relatively small enough to stochasticity play a role.
So the difference is in scale. In one case, you're restricted to a population.
Yeah, one within population, genes. Well, genes and species are different things. But one is the diversity within a species, the other one is diversity across the species.
Yes, but if you give up on the species concept as you suggested on a previous slide, you'll get to the same. But
that's perfect. Yeah. I told that, but don't say that too loud. I'm a biologist. I'll lose my job. Forget species. It doesn't exist. Any other question? So thank you so much, guys, and we get together tomorrow, 2:30. Hey.
That was amazing. Yeah.
You like it?
I was wondering if I could some of your slides. That would make it much easier for my students back home to understand,